Hello, everyone. This is the Albums Only podcast. My name is Jacob Slater. With me, as always, is Alan Beavers. And this week, we are. It's interesting because Beaves kind of predicated our choice for this album by saying that we didn't really have any female artists or kind of female albums. Saying female just seems like I'm kind of a weirdo or something. Albums by women musicians. So we decided to go for one of the biggest women artists of all time. I'm talking about Madonna and her 1984 sophomore album, Like a Virgin, album put out by Warner Brothers. An album that really solidified Madonna's place as a pop superstar. Her first album did very well, but this was the album that said, hey, I'm here to stay. I have the clout to make it in this business. But it's weird because for me personally, Madonna was always an artist that I knew of because of cultural osmosis, I guess you would say. I knew there was a pop singer named Madonna out there, but I never really listened to her music. I never really knew her as a music artist. I think the closest I ever got was Weird Al's famous parody song "Like a Surgeon."
Yeah.
That's closest. Is that the same thing with you, Beebs?
Yeah, that's the first thing that I can remember. In fact, when I was listening to this album, I listened to it 3 or 4 times at least, right in a row. Whenever I hear "Like a Virgin," that the opening beat to it, I instantly think of Weird Al. I can't help it. Like a Surgeon is what plays in my mind, which is probably not healthy, but
Just speaks to Weird Al's talent, I guess, that his parodies are so wonderfully crafted that you often mistake them for the original.
well, and sometimes he even his songs are better produced than the originals, in my opinion. On his most recent album, Mandatory Fun, there's a track or two that you think, man, this actually sounds better than the original did. So
It's satire being elevated to an art form for Weird Al's latest stuff. But we're not talking about Weird Al yet. We are talking about we almost said Nirvana. Not talking about Nirvana yet either. We're talking about Madonna and her second album, Like a Virgin, produced by, I believe it's Nile Rodgers, the man behind the famous 70s disco band Chic. If you've ever heard the song Le Freak, he produced this record. And to kind of throw it into the ongoing web of connections here, Nile Rodgers also worked with David Bowie on his 1983 album Let's Dance. There's your connection there. And produced by Nile Rodgers at the Power Station Studio in New York. Also included Bernard Edwards and Tony Thompson, also from Chic, on several songs on this album. It's actually very interesting because it's a very short album, really. Only 9 songs, only about 43 minutes long, so it doesn't take too much time. But it is definitely a case of every song is great, at least in my opinion. After listening to this album several times, I go as far to say that Madonna crafted each song so well that there is really no clunkers. It's an album that featured 5 singles: Material Girl, Angel, Like a Virgin, the song Into the Groove, which was featured in some reissues of this album, not featured in at least the version I listened to, and I believe Dress You Up was also a single. Just to say you have 5 singles is one thing. To say that you have 5 singles and 3 of them are top 5 hits is a completely other matter, I think.
I just have to mention something. If you go to somewhere like Wikipedia or any of these other places, you can sort of see what the singles from the album were. And it's just fascinating to me. I don't know how you feel, Jacob. Like a Virgin was released October 31st, 1984 on Halloween. The last single was released July 24th, 1985. I think for people who don't really look at this or don't have a solid history of just albums and singles, and we've sort of seen the death of that in recent times. We don't see, singles but 1 or 2 released to sort of hype up an album. And then once an album's out, it's got a couple of weeks and then it's basically over. This was a different time frame. I mean, pop music in the 80s and 90s really was built to last for months. An album had many singles, and you would sustain an album over the charts for months at a time. It's interesting how much the record industry has changed, and you don't see that anymore.
And it is very interesting just to think that you'd be hearing a single from an album that was released a year ago.
Yeah.
Still very popular. It is very kind of a strange thing to think about now, when a lot of the times it has kind of moved back towards a singles only format in a lot of ways. You tend to not really see a focus on albums anymore, more so just kind of songs. It was an incredibly successful album, as I've said. It was an album that kind of solidified Madonna's role as a pop star, and really was an album that kind of solidified Madonna's role as an artist, because she took a very hands-on approach to this album. She was in the studio for every single song during the mixing and the editing. You know, she wanted to prove that she was a serious musician and not just a kind of pop singer, which I can understand. You know, if you are an artist, I assume you want to be taken seriously as an artist. You don't want to assume that you're a crafted thing. Yeah, a studio's put together little robot to kind of produce music. And I think, especially as a woman in the industry, it's still bad now, but it was probably even worse back in the 80s. I think there was a definite, well, you're just, you know, the singer. You don't really have any decision-making power in how your music is done and kind of given to you. So I think this was definitely an album where she wanted to step out on her own, so to speak, to kind of show that she had the strength of character to be an artist that deserves kind of respect, given the respect that she deserves. And I think she definitely did it on this record.
I'm struck by, I mean, people, if you're not familiar with Madonna's timeline, in 1983, she really breaks onto the scene with her eponymous release. That brought her into the spotlight. When you talk about, you know, hits off that previous release, you're looking at Lucky Star, Borderline, and Holiday. So you're looking at like big songs, big pop songs that really broke through in 1983. And you sort of, when you do that, you have to deliver on the next one to build that hype, particularly in the mid-'80s. And, you know, that's what Madonna did.
So I think we should get to the album proper here. Only 9 songs, but I think there's enough to talk about here. Go for the first song, Material Girl, second single from the album. A song that, first off, I really enjoy. It's one of my favorite songs on the record. Second of all, really brings to mind an artist who was also big at this time, 1984, Cyndi Lauper, who released her album She's So Unusual this same year. And if you listen to Material Girl, you'll kind of get a lot of the same kind of feelings from something like Girls Just Want to Have Fun. You know, you got this kind of big, heavy pop synth track that's kind of going on with a girl who's kind of singing in a kind of light, high register, you know, a kind of a sprightly voice. So, yeah, you know, if we're going to be talking about kind of 80s music for me, I think what people have already kind of gotten to expect from me is that I love synthesizer music. You know, you put a synth in a song, especially if it's from the 1980s, I can't get enough of it.
Later, how do you feel about synthesizers and saxophones together?
It was like two great tastes that taste great together, man. Like, got chocolate in my peanut butter.
I had to bring that up because we both enjoy those things quite a bit, and we're suckers for that sort of thing. And there's a track on here, Shooby Doo, which I think indulges both of those nicely. So,
but yeah, Material Girl, you got that big fat synth going on. You got guitar, bass, and drums performed by the guys from Chic. So there's kind of a great tight groove going on in the song. It's really interesting because culturally we associate the 80s, the 1980s, with being an era obsessed with consumerism and consumerist culture. And then you see a song right in the middle of the decade called Material Girl, which is a song about a girl who is only interested in things and possessions. It's weird, to me at least, because it seems like something that everyone was aware of, but didn't really kind of fight against until the 90s.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love Material Girl, the song, actually, a lot. It's extremely catchy. It's interesting, when you first hear that song, at least when I first went back and heard it, I remembered it poppier than what it actually is. I mean, it's catchy, but there's a lot of weird sounds here. You've got like a Devo-esque repeated, living in a material world. These synthesizers that are being used, they're not super ear-friendly. I mean, it's put together perfectly, but they're a little harsher than what you expect, or at least what I remembered. So I actually enjoyed that a bit more, because the instruments, the sounds they're making are very unique in pop. I don't, for, like mainstream super chart-heavy pop, it sounds way different than I remembered it sounding. And it's super catchy. It's just, a great track in that way. And I think you're right about it. It's really signifying the 1980s. I mean, we can get into this, you talked about Cyndi Lauper and Madonna. There was sort of this women's, coming out party in the 80s where sexual liberation had fully flourished, or so it seems, even into the mainstream for certain artists, particularly Madonna, and we'll touch on that maybe a little later.
It's also kind of a slower song than you'd kind of expect from a pop song, I think. It's got a kind of good groove to it, but it's also kind of slightly slower than you might expect.
You used the word groove. I didn't really think of that at first, but yeah, there is this grooviness to it. It's not even, I don't know how to describe it, yeah, but it's not even like so much upbeat as it is built on this sort of this groove that is just infectious.
You gotta thank the guys from Chic for that, I suppose.
Well, and that makes perfect sense, so you can see how that works.
Moving on to the second song, and yet another single, Angel. As opposed to kind of the big synth, Cyndi Lauper style pop song that Material Girl was, Angel is kind of a slinkier song, reminiscent of, and this is a term I always kind of use. People really don't know what I'm talking about half the time, but it's definitely a night driving song that you can visualize playing over the radio as you're kind of driving along a street at night with the street lights kind of passing by, illuminating your face. If this were our camera angle, you'd see the lights passing over your face as you listen to the song.
There's a certain tweetiness to the synthesizers that comes through it, the very sharp, high-pitched, like almost like a tweet. And something about that sound, it evokes night driving. And that sounds perverse and weird, but like Michael Mann drawn to the flame, that's what it automatically makes me think of.
In the kind of composition section about the making of this album, it mentions that Angel has a 3-chord ascending hook, which serves as the verse and chorus, which was a term that I wasn't familiar with at all. I know what a chord is. I think I know what a hook is. I mean, I'm no pop singer, but I think I know what a hook is. Now, looking back on the song, I kind of feel I know what it's talking about, where there's just like these little flourishes at the end. Because you have this kind of driving synth beat going on, and at the same time you have these synth flourishes laid on top.
So this is actually one of my favorite tracks on the album. Actually, I had forgotten all about this song. I don't even know if I knew that it existed. I say I forgot about it. I don't even know if I knew it existed. It's interesting to me it's the second single off the album, and I wasn't familiar with it. I had never chanced upon it at any other time. But I actually really enjoyed this. This might be the most upbeat song that I just sort of gravitated to. I found myself having this stuck in my head, so...
In a lot of ways, it's almost a complete 180 from what you heard on the first track, Material Girl, the kind of big Cyndi Lauper song. And here, she's singing in a lower register. She's kind of completely transformed in her voice in a lot of ways.
In the lyrically, too, I mean, saying that you're a material girl, I mean, that's risque till the 80s is fully formed. I mean, that's playing with stereotype and sort of...
social satire as well.
Right, exactly. So you have that level, but Angel is sort of like the more traditional sugar sweet kind of pop song, and it works well there.
It took me a while to get really into it, but I think by the third listen, I was like, yeah, this is a song that I really, really enjoy. So we move on to the third track, the title track here, Like a Virgin, which was the lead single. The song that originally almost wasn't going to be put on the album at all. Nile Rodgers didn't believe it had a good enough hook to be a single and wasn't really suitable for Madonna to perform. But turns out that hook was better than he thought. A song, I should say, that, like Material Girl, I think kind of speaks to the era in which it came from, originated. Because even like the album cover that was created was kind of a double entendre, contrasting the divine origins of Madonna's name, which is obviously the Catholic version of the Virgin Mary, and the kind of sexually charged imagery of, Madonna in a bridal dress, kind of laying sensually across the couch or whatever it is. And the song Like a Virgin is very much the same way, in that it is at once a very sexually charged song, but at the same time it's also a very kind of naive, almost innocent in a lot of ways. Madonna has moved back into the higher register that's used in Material Girl to kind of give it almost like a teeny bopper vibe. And I think Like a Virgin is a song that feels really, to me, like an 80s interpretation of a 60s pop song.
Yeah, it's a great track. I think, again, the synthesizers here, I don't know what it is. I think it's Nile Rodgers. I think the sound that's being created there it's fuzzy in a way that almost hints that it shouldn't be mainstream when you first hear it. It's just the way that everything comes together on it. It's perfect. It's just weird enough to really set the song apart from everything else that's going on in pop music, but it's just acceptable enough with Madonna's lyrics to make it work. And I think what you said too about the Like a Virgin playing upon the name Madonna, yeah, that's pretty clever, and that was clearly the idea here.
A constant chugging bass line using a synth, guitar flourishes that kind of accent the piece. It's a really simple song, but it is incredibly catchy, and it is a hook that will stick in your mind. It feels like a song that should be given a lot more focus, given how important it is in the kind of the scheme of things. But really, pop music is simple music when you get down to it. That isn't always very simple, but basically it is simple music. And so we move on to track number 4, Over and Over. A song that I, of course, had never heard of before listening to this album, but it was one of my early favorites, actually.
Really? Okay.
And it's kind of a rockier song, I guess. It's at a higher tempo than the previous 3 songs to it, but it's fun. It's energetic, synth-driven little pop song with a fantastic chorus. Just, it makes you want to get up and move, which, I mean, I'm not the most mobile guy around, so when a song makes me want to get up and move, it's good.
To me, it sounds insanely like something that Depeche Mode would have put out from their first album, Speak and Spell. It sounds so much like Depeche Mode. It's shocking to me. It's sort of one of the weaker ones for me, to be honest with you. It's catchy. I mean, it's catchy, and it does make you want to move. I don't know, something here wasn't quite working perfectly for me. It's probably one of my least favorite songs on the album. Enjoy it, though. I still think it's a highly enjoyable song. It's just, to me, it's not anything too special amongst a bunch of other really good sons on here.
This is a song that you want to play when you're like, we need to do a montage, guys. What's a good song to montage to? Every little bit of the song kind of lends itself to the gradual completion of a task. We move on from one of the more upbeat songs on the record, at least in my opinion, to one of the slower songs on the record. Love Don't Live Here Anymore, based on a 1978 track by Rose Royce, or a soul and R&B group. A song that was actually performed by Madonna live with a orchestra, which was apparently a very different experience for her. Apparently she actually broke down and cried after the end of her performance of this because she was just so overwhelmed by the music. That just really speaks to the power of a kind of classical instrumentation, I suppose, that it can dredge up such potent emotions. This is a very interesting one to me. Saw it a little bit in I Like a Virgin, but the idea of kind of synthing up older forms of music, like Love Don't Live Here Anymore. It's a very kind of classical kind of soul song. Reminds me a lot of stuff you would have heard Frank Sinatra perform, or Burt Bacharach, that kind of string-assisted vocal jazz performance. Along with the strings, you have these synthesizers. So it gives it a really kind of weird sound, at least to me.
I agree with you. This is one of my favorite Madonna tracks, if I had to pick some. I mean, this one is way up there, probably with Holiday as some of my favorite tracks of Madonna's. You're right about that, though. I think you have a great point when you say there's a weird vibe you get from both the orchestra and this like weirdly synthetic climbing and descending bass, very that's sort of the backbone. It's odd. Again, I keep harping on this, but I think it's important to say that's the most fascinating thing about this album is I keep feeling like these aren't the most radio-friendly synthesizers at times, but everything is weirdly put together where it all works. And Love Don't Live Here Anymore is a perfect example of that. And Madonna just sings the hell out of this song, by the way, too, which is what really makes it, this is really the performance of hers on the album.
Yeah, vocal-wise, this is definitely Madonna's height. I think she really lets loose, and it definitely shows, I think, because it's so powerful. And really, the strings really help add to that emotion. The swelling of the violins and everything as she kind of reaches that crescendo. It's very interesting. It's very amazing song, and I really enjoy it as well. So we move on to the last single, at least on this record, as I said, Into the Groove, although it was a single and was included on some versions of Like a Virgin. It was not included on the original version. Talking about the sixth song on the album, Dress You Up. Starts off with like a really almost industrial style kind of drum machine beat, which was it surprised me when I first heard it. I didn't really expect something that sounded like Machine Gun from Portishead.
Oh, that's a great thought. Yeah.
Kind of that hard industrial drum machine sound. It was one of the last songs to be included on the record. The songwriters submitted it late. Although Nile Rodgers didn't really think there was time to kind of work on it. Apparently Madonna herself took a great interest in the song and made sure that it was completed, as she was very interested in the lyrics. It didn't really seem all that kind of amazing. Well, maybe not amazing, especially when we've looked at lyrics from works like Jeff Buckley or Leonard Cohen. You can definitely see a strong lyrical focus. Dress You Up doesn't seem on the surface to be a lyrically dense song. Mentions in the first line, you've got style, that's what all the girls say. Satin sheets and luxury so fine. All your suits are custom made in London, but I've got something that you'll really like. It's a song, at least in the Wikipedia article, it mentions that a extended metaphor for fashion and sex, comparing dressing up with passion, which I guess when you consider the context of the 80s, we already see a song on here called Material Girl, where Madonna who has kind of replaced romantic affection with affection for wealth and the accumulation of things. To see a song like Dress You Up, where romantic love is substituted for fashion, for kind of the surface appeal, a strictly kind of visual process. I can see why she would be interested in that, because really Like a Virgin in a lot of ways is kind of, it's a little bit more subversive than it would seem nowadays.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You have the kind of counterpoint between the holiness of Madonna's name and the kind of sexually charged nature of Like a Virgin. You have the seemingly pro-consumerist but really kind of anti-consumer anthem of Material Girl. And you have Dress You Up, which kind of really kind of pushes the idea of fashion as a kind of sexual thing. Really kind of increases the role of fashion, which was already by the 1980s a growing popular thing and more connected with music.
And more connected with who music was targeted to, teenagers. I mean, you know, the advent of the shopping mall in particular.
Generally speaking, Dress You Up is not a song that, upon repeated listens, has really affected me as much as like Love Don't Live Here Anymore or Over and Over, but it is, analyzing it now, I kind of see that I can see Madonna's thought process for why she included this on the album. And it's a pretty good dance number as well.
I actually like this one a lot. I do remember the song. I had heard it when I was younger. My mother is a pretty big Madonna fan, or was. A lot of interesting things about the song. There's this sort of bouncy guitar that comes in, and it screams Nile Rodgers. Like, if you know Nile Rodgers, that chic kind of like bouncy, like catchy little guitar riff. It's great. That's what sort of makes this song for me, at least. Another interesting point about this album, in 1985, there was a certain coalition of people called the Parents Music Resource Center that put this on a list of filthy 15 songs for sexual content. Believe it or not, this is really interesting. The founder of the organization was Tipper Gore, the wife of the former vice president of the United States, and she considered the line "Gonna Dress You Up in My Love" as exemplifying vulgar music. Fascinating idea that this would have been considered that obscene in 1985.
Like nowadays, it would totally slip your mind because it seems like such a kind of non-issue of a song. But of course, the PRMC was a big deal back in the 80s. As a Frank Zappa fan, I was acutely familiar with his battles against what he considered censorship of music.
You can YouTube some great videos of him on Crossfire on CNN in I think the late 80s or something like that. It's great.
It was like Frank Zappa, Dee Snider, Twisted Sister, and John Denver. Three of the big celebrity voices against the PRMC, but pretty good song. Moving on to track number 7, Shooby-Doo. No, not Scooby-Doo's cousin. I'll be here all week, folks. Not all that surprising considering the chamber pop / soul music of Love Don't Live Here Anymore. Shooby-Doo, a very, very kind of classic ballad in a lot of ways. You start off with the piano and strings that kind of move into a tribute to Motown. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. It's just a really good Motown-inspired soul song, which for some reason I don't ever really associate with kind of 80s music. Soul music and R&B music, to kind of hear it in an 80s light, it sounds like an alien to me. It's good, but it definitely sounds like something that had fallen by the wayside by the time the 80s rolled around. But I think the most important thing to note about this song is it's got some sweet sax.
Oh, man.
And you thought I was going to forget it. No. We get some good sax, specifically called a saxophone breakdown in the Wikipedia article by Lenny Pickett, who was a horn player for Tower of Power back in the 1970s, kind of responsible for a few hits.
This song does a little bit of everything. It's part of me considers the chorus, which is just shooby-doo, doo-wop. I mean, it's just playing with that for quite a bit of time. part of you is, well, just a little lazy. I get it's a pop song, but like, what does that even mean? But the other thing about this song is it starts very sparse as a ballad. It gets more upbeat into sort of this Motown tribute, which it is. And then it has the saxophone at the end, which is so utterly 80s. I don't know what I think about this song. I'm just sort of glad it exists. Other than that, I don't know what really to do with it.
It's interesting to kind of see Madonna's melding of kind of modern musical forms. By the way, this was actually one of the records to make use of digital recording, one of the originators of kind of digital recording format rather than analog. So to the melding of modern musical styles and recording techniques with kind of the old school musical forms like R&B and soul. She does it several times on this record. Although Shooby-Doo is not one of my favorite songs on this record, I really enjoy it. I like that it's here because it sounds so... It's an older song, and it's a kind of older school song, but it's just really enjoyable to kind of see it transformed by the 80s. So moving from Shooby-Doo, we get to Pretender. A song that is really kind of built, I think, upon like a heavy synth bass line and kind of a more sprightly synth flourish. I think it's very hard for me to kind of explain it.
Yeah, it's like a jingle almost. That synthesizer is very jangly.
I think it's really a song that could only really be performed by a woman because it deals with a very female viewpoint. That about a woman in a relationship with a guy who is pushing her into things that she doesn't want to do. But I'll just read a couple of verses here because that's what I do best. He's a pretender, he knows just what to say. He's a pretender, yeah, you meet him every day. He's a pretender, that fish that got away. He's a pretender, why'd I fall in love? It was so strange the way he held my hand. I wanted more than just a one-night stand. He had a way of making me believe that he was mine and that he'd never leave. It sounds like a dark song, and it really kind of is a dark song about a person who's being pressured by a really kind of bad, toxic relationship. Other than that, though, it's really, honestly, a song that kind of slips my mind whenever I revisit this song, or this album. You know, by the end, you're kind of like, probably the bottom half of songs you're not going to remember as well as the front half. But generally speaking, like, Shooby-Doo, really enjoy that. And the last song we're going to talk about, I enjoyed that as well. But Pretender always kind of slips away. It's an entertaining song, but it's not one of, I think, the highlights.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I can understand how this song could be really popular, sort of with Madonna's, like, teenage girl fans. I think that, probably a lot of those girls are at the point of their life where it's relatable, I think. Yeah, I find myself weirdly enjoying this song. I like that sort of progression, that jangly synth progression. I like that quite a bit. So that sticks with me, and if I'm in the right mood, that I can enjoy that. So yeah, I think it's fine. It's interesting to note, how the song got on there, how it could relate to the audience.
We do move on to the 9th track. Is this the shortest album we've ever covered on here?
No. The Descendants.
Ah, yes, The Descendants. Good album. I just forgot about it. So we move on to the last track of Like a Virgin, Stay, which it took me a while, but it really, at least the opening, really reminds me of something by Tears for Fears. Really reminds me of, I think it's Everyone Wants to Rule the World.
Oh, yes. I didn't put that together, but there's something about the tone there. You're right.
It's kind of hard to describe it. The composition entry here mentions using triple rhythms and double-backed vocals. I don't know what a triple rhythm is. I assume it's, if you listen to the song, there's something about, I believe the synth sounds like it's almost wavering, like it's kind of shifting. One of the things that really kind of struck me about the song is that it reminds me so much of something that Tears for Fears would do actually a few years later. So really, Tears for Fears would be copying Madonna in this case, I suppose.
This song is good. I think it's a good closer. It's the right song to close the album with. It's enjoyable enough. Like this, to me, it feels like it fits well on the album. I think it's enjoyable enough. I was surprised. I think this is a really good pop album. I mean, you could see how, especially if you throw Into the Groove on there, you can see how this really propelled her career. She had the hits in there, and even the songs that weren't hits were catchy enough for any teen girl to buy the record, or any other fan of hers to buy the record and then, play it repeatedly and not get tired of it. It worked perfectly in that way. And now even viewing it today, I mean, we both enjoy it. There's good pop songs on this album. So you can really come at this from almost any angle and appreciate it. It is what it is, but it is a nice piece of pop that does its job very well.
Personally, I've always been a huge fan of 80s pop music. I think my constant and unnecessary repping of the synthesizer would let you know that I enjoy synth pop and 80s pop. It really did strike me listening to this album just how good it was and just how good the songs were constructed. Generally, I think the opinion is that pop music is worthy of scorn because it is considered disposable music, that is considered like simplistic music. Although I've certainly had that opinion at some point in time in my life, I don't think that's necessarily an accurate statement. I think to create good music is certainly a feat that a lot of people try and fail at. So to see kind of Madonna gathering together these people, like Nile Rodgers, to kind of help her construct not just songs, but an entire album, you really get an appreciation for pop music.
So I agree with you. This is one of the most fascinating things to me. I don't know if you reflect and you feel the same way, Jacob, but when I was, a young kid, I liked pop music. That's what my mother played in the car and, everything else. As you get to be a teenager, I don't like that because, it's too catchy, or it's, it's stupid. It's what everyone else likes. And then by the time you start to hit your mid-20s, for me, maybe even a little later, you start to appreciate pop music for the craftsmanship of it, at least, and how hard that is to do. To be able to see it here in full effect, you really can understand. This is a good album to listen to as well, to hear the compliments, the flourishes. That's another thing that we don't talk about too much. There's great accent work here and accent work there. It can also be heard in Holiday. I know we didn't cover that, it's not on the album, but that's the most interesting thing I picked up by listening to Madonna on this album, was the amount of, whether it be a tambourine, or it be some rhythm section, or whether it be a pointed synthesizer that's only at the end of the chorus. All these little elements that, gilding the lily, so to speak, those elements really make it and elevate it in terms of pop music.
I think people who are listening to this episode I think that you should listen to Like a Virgin and not just enjoy the music because it is good music, but I also kind of want them to look at it, because we always give credit to Pet Sounds, and Brian Wilson and George Martin for constructing albums like Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper. We give credit to them for crafting these albums that were pop albums. We give them credit for crafting great pop music, but after kind of that era died, we started giving less and less credit to people who created pop music. We started seeing it as more and more disposable, consumable music, and especially by the 1980s, that was kind of the cultural milieu, was to view things as disposable and consumable. But I think if people listen to Like a Virgin, now that the kind of hype has died down, maybe now that we have a more, I guess, cultured understanding of music, that we've kind of moved beyond the general pop music sucks ideal, that we can appreciate just how well-crafted a pop album this is, and that you don't really get much better pop music in the 80s like you do with Madonna and like you do with Like a Virgin. So, very good album. And that will do it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you take a listen to this album. and maybe listen to some of Madonna's later stuff. I haven't heard any of it, so I'm looking forward to kind of visiting an artist I've never really knew and understood. Next week, we are covering almost the complete opposite, I think, of Madonna's Like a Virgin. We're going a little bit further into the future to the year 1996 with a rap artist that is very popular amongst the alternative music circles. I'm talking of Dr. Octagon and his landmark, groundbreaking rap album, Dr. Octagonacologist. So that's a really good record. It'll be a really good episode. Hope you guys tune in next week.